Hi, my name's Beck Chalmers, and in this video, I'm going to share with you how to feedback a flow profiler report to industry standards. Now, it's likely if you're watching this video that you're either about to attend your level 1 interpreter training, in which case, welcome to the family. Or perhaps you have already attended your flow profiler training and you're looking for a refresher. Or maybe even you're just doing your due diligence on Flow Profiler to see if it's a good fit for your organization. Whatever your reason for being here, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you very much for sharing your valuable time with us. Now, feeding back reports to industry standards is important for several reasons. Firstly, it satisfies even requirements around test fairness, so the fair use of psychometric assessment within your business. Secondly, it satisfies the requirements around responsible use of assessment in your business. And finally, for those of you in jurisdictions whereby you have data protection legislation to comply with, it will help you satisfy the requirements around access or rights to data. Now, new interpreters will often express a nervousness about their first feedback sessions, in which case my message to you is that's perfectly natural. We've got your back here. You're learning a new skill, and what you'll see quite quickly is the reports are laid out in such a way they will support your feedback sessions as you continue to build your confidence with this material. But it's not just about us as interpreters, it's also about the people receiving the feedback. And often people can feel a little bit anxious because they don't know what to expect from these sessions. So a big part of your job as an interpreter is to help with that anxiety, help with that perceived risk by demystifying some of the perceived mysteries around Flow Profiler, but also creating a common language so everyone can contribute equally to the conversation. Now, for my sessions, I always like to start with the session purpose, articulate why we're actually here. And then I'm right into what is being measured, how it's being measured, providing perhaps some answers to some questions a person may have about their results, communicating how the information is actually going to be used by the organization, and then articulating any next steps that are likely to occur as a result of our time together. Now, when we are looking at our session purpose, I find it very useful to articulate that this is actually a feedback session, not a development session. Phew. A feedback session has the purpose of communicating what's in the Flow Profiler report, hitting the key areas of what's being measured by a Flow Profiler assessment, how Flow Profiler goes about measuring what it does, and then how that information is going to be used. Now, when I'm feeding back the full Flow Profiler, typically my sessions are 30 to 35 minutes in length. You may actually prefer to make your sessions 40 to 45 minutes so you don't feel rushed or pressured, certainly while you're developing your confidence and your language around this space. For the factor-specific reports for EQ flow, resilience flow, and motivation flow, I'm generally allowing 20 to 25 minutes. But again, you may choose for your early ones to allow at least 30 minutes just to make sure you have enough space in time. In the purpose part of my feedback session, I'm also communicating why they've been asked to complete the assessment. And this is where I choose to cover off how the information is going to be used. It might be that this information is going to be used as part of a development exercise. So there's a training workshop or a coaching activity, or perhaps a one-on-one conversation that's about to take place. It may be that this information is going to be used as part of a benchmarking exercise, or they may be asked to participate in a team culture event, or even there may be work on organizational values that are being undertaken. However this information is going to be used, this is where I would be sharing that with the recipient. And finally, in the session purpose part of my plan, I want to get a sense of the individual's test approach. Specifically, what I'm looking for here are any potential difficulties that they may have had throughout the testing experience. Now, that may lead to a conversation around, I didn't understand the questions, or I have dyslexia and it took me a little bit longer than normal. Or it could be I was doing the assessment at home and the children and the pets were tearing the house apart. But if there was a reason or any kind of disruption, it's always good to know that early on, because it may influence the conversation later on. From here, we're very much into the report itself. Now, for this video, I have chosen to use the full flow profiler development report. Those of you who are familiar with this report will acknowledge that it reports on everything that we measure. And as a result, tremendous amount of value in it, but it is 49 pages in length. I, at this point, like to reassure people that we are not going to be covering off all 49 pages. Instead, we're going to focus on the parts of the report that communicate what's being measured and how the information's being measured. And then, of course, answer any questions about their results. So from here, I skim through to our model page. And our model page very much is communicating what it is that we're measuring. Now, I like to start this part of the session with some common language. So right here, I'm going to be describing the difference between a factor and a dimension. Now, a factor, you can think about it as a broad area of measurement. So in this instance, we're looking at emotional intelligence, social intelligence, motivation, and resilience. The other thing we have is our dimensions, and you can think about dimensions as observable behaviors. So there are 18 dimensions that go to make up Flow Profiler, and you can see which relate to what factor on the model here. Now, as I mentioned, the dimensions are most akin to an observable behavior. So you should be able to observe this behavior in other people. And if you're self-aware, certainly be aware of the behavior for yourself. The other key point about a flow profiler assessment is it's actually measuring across 2 states, those states being day-to-day and under pressure. Now, it has been well proven that these areas being measured do change over time. And an example to support that, my proof point, might be something like resilience, whereby in clinical psychology, there is a term called post-traumatic resilience. And it's this idea that a person becomes more resilient off the back of experiencing hardship or adversity. Now, that would be an example of a factor being proven to change over a period of time. And as a result, we would suggest, or our team of psychologists tell us, that this set of results is valid for 12 to 18 months, whereby which time you can choose to retake the assessment just to check in on where you are at in that moment in time. But in all instances, we treat the dimensions, the observable behaviors, as abilities, skills, and intelligences that can be developed. Now, that's a pretty cool thing, because we're not assigning a person in Flow Profiler with a designation. We're not putting you in a pigeonhole. We're not going to sell you are this color or that color, although those types of instruments can be very useful for the purposes they're used for. Here in Flow Profiler, we're really interested in your adaptive strategies and to what extent are they serving you and your objectives in the workplace. From here, we now move to our STEM score page, which is communicating how the results are measured. You'll see our lovely little storyline on this page, and it's absolutely perfectly wonderful just to go through this page point by point, certainly as you're getting started. But here are the key messages. When you are asked to complete your Flow Profiler assessment, you are asked to rate statements on a 7-point scale. What then happens is our algorithm does some fancy math and produces something called a STEN score. STEN is a term used in statistics, and it refers to a scale of 10 units. So we're converting from a 7-point scale to a 10-point scale. Standard to 10 is what it stands for. And it is worthwhile remembering that these aren't 10 equal units, but rather designed so that we can create our bell curve or our standard distribution curve. So whereby the majority of the people in our population will fall towards the center of our bell curve, and around 1 to 2% will fall at the ranges of 1 or 10. So if an individual is achieving a result of a 1, 2, or 3, that would indicate that they're in our underusing zone. That in itself is indicating that there is very little or perhaps an absence of the behavior being measured. And that only matters to the extent that it's important to the role. If it's not important to the role, give the poor person a break, leave them alone. They're not broken. But if it is a behavioral requirement of the role, then the opportunity here is to help that person develop that behavior. Moving towards our 4s and our 5s, this is our solid base zone. In our solid base zone, the person has indicated through their results that there is an awareness of that behavior. They have a foundation to build on. But for whatever reason, that behavior is not particularly active at the moment. So it might be dormant, it might be in a state of rest. It might be that the individual isn't even aware that they have this particular superpower. And if it's a requirement of the role, the opportunity here is to help that person activate that behavior, bring it to a level of consciousness where they have it as a resource to draw on actively. Our flow zone, our 6s and our 7s, very much the inspiration for the story behind flowprofiler. And I do need to do another video that speaks more about the concept of flow. But for now, it represents our state of optimal performance, whereby an individual is demonstrating an active use of the behavior, but they're not overstretching themselves. They're unlikely to experience stress signs such as burnout. The opportunity here is to help the person maintain the healthy use of that particular behavior. Our 8, 9s and 10s, our overusing zone. Here, well, it is a requirement. Many situations, particularly with the transitions we've all been experiencing over the last couple of years, do require us to stretch our behaviors to the overusing zone. And that's proportional to the situations often that we're finding ourselves in. The difficulty, however, comes in spending too much time, particularly in the 9s and the 10s. Here, the behavior can often become stressful. And this is where we start to see negative signs of stress, so some of the health implications, or perhaps even letting it go as far as we're completely burning out. Now, I have come across several people who are innately strong with that particular dimension. They operate with no stress because it is absolutely part of their DNA. Very, very natural for them. In that instance, even though the individual themselves is not expressing stress or signs or showing signs of stress, you'll often find that the people around them are adjusting to create space for such a strong use of the behavior that it can become stressful on their colleagues. So the opportunity here is that if this is a concern, is to help them manage the strong use of that behavior. So in our underusing zone, we have develop, our solid base is to activate, our flow zone is to maintain, and our overusing zone is to manage. From here, we're very much now into the individual's response. Now, what you see on these charts will be determined by which report you're using. In this instance, we're using the full flow profiler, so we are reporting across all 18 dimensions, across the 2 states of day-to-day on the top and under pressure underneath. Now, this chart is in the report because many people respond well to having information presented visually. And it can give you a nice overview, perhaps, of where someone is stretching their behavior between the 2 states. The chart's getting bigger, as in it's moving towards the outside circles, or perhaps their behavior might be scrunching a little bit under pressure, or perhaps it's largely static and unchanged. But behind this, we then go into the factor specific, and we've broken our factors into emotional and social intelligence as one, so our EQ, resilience, and then motivation. Firstly, you'll see at the top, you have the index tabs, and those index tabs help you understand where it is that you are actually at in the report at any one time. On this page, we are reporting on our emotional intelligence measures, which is self-confidence, emotional regulation, regard for others, social awareness, and emotional awareness. And we have the definitions here, and I will always encourage you to direct people back to these definitions. It is these definitions that are intended by our psychologists, and it's these definitions which are the observable behaviors that we are looking at. Beneath this, we have another table across the top. We have got what we call the raw scores, so the numbers, the results themselves, for day-to-day across the top line and under pressure on the bottom. Now, my preferred way is rather than offer, because by this point I've been talking a whole heap, but rather by offering my interpretation of the results, is to ask the recipient to say what they see. Tell me what you see. And often people will either go to the highest or lowest scoring ones. They'll go straight for the extreme. So you might get someone going, oh, that emotional regulation, oh, that's a little low, or oh, that emotional awareness, that looks a little high. And I'm not here to offer any opinion. What do you think about it is my next question. How does that sit? Does it make sense to you? Oh, I'm not sure. Well, let's go back to the definition. Oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. At this point, I am not looking to have a development conversation, so I pretty much leave it there. But often in this instance, I would say, well, if this was a development conversation, perhaps we'd look at the emotional regulation and identify strategies to help support you in the workplace. But it's not, so we're going to move on. Next in our report, we have got each dimension for that factor reported on. Starting with our day-to-day, you see this from the tab at the top. We're starting with self-confidence here, and this is where you've got your score, and then we have plotted the score on the scale. We have some key points, behavioural key points, and we have some development considerations and some development actions. So this report can be used as a self-directed learning tool. Behind this, we then have the under pressure results. Where you see duplication of content, so basically the words are saying the same thing, it is because the person has achieved the same zone, both day-to-day and under pressure, and that's where you're getting your duplication from. The report will go on and cover off each of the dimensions, hence its length, until we get to our motivation flow results. Once again, we have got our definitions and the results sit in the table beneath that. For this one, I do like to go through and just make sure we have a common language around each of the dimensions. So growth in this instance is professional growth, so professional learning. The next one is the well-being, something we're all very familiar with these days, this conversation of work and life balance. Reward in this instance refers to financial incentives. Purpose, reason, purpose, meaning for getting out of bed and coming to do my job, and autonomy is pretty self-explanatory. But again, having had that conversation, I'm asking the recipient, looking at your results, say what you see. How does it sit in your belly? Does that seem about right to you? No? Well, let's go back to the definition. That's interesting. What do you think? Now, sometimes people will express concern, well, I am this on that and I'm that on this. And it's like, is it serving you in the workplace? Is there room perhaps for improvement? And which directions are your scores going? Because what we're actually looking for here, remember, is that the individual is able to demonstrate adaptive behavioral strategies. And that's really the competency that underpins the whole flow profiler family. It's all about the adaptive behavioral strategies. The other thing that you might like to tease out with the motivation results is that not only is this your motivation drivers, so you're really into, if I was your manager, professional growth is important to you. It's very important, particularly under pressure. I recognize you for your efforts. My job is definitely not to micromanage you. If I can align my messaging in terms of the purpose, the reason why we're doing what we're doing, I'm going to get better engagement from you, and the well-being is important. So I'm going to need to present you with a good case if we're going to be doing lots and lots of overtime. Collaboration and reward, less so. And they go, yeah, that's me. It's amazing. Thanks so much. And then you go, so the other way that we can use this report is then as a team level, and then sharing, because we're all going to come at this a little bit differently. And this is a big part of understanding our differences, being more inclusive, respecting the diversity within the group. So there's heaps of cool ways you can use this information. Getting excited again, Beck. For those of you who don't know me, I have a habit of getting excited. But from here, we then go through and report on each of the dimensions, day-to-day first, under pressure sitting right behind, until we get to our resilience flow results. Once again, the definitions on the top. So I do like here to have a quick run through just to check for the common language with the definitions. So optimism, to what extent is your glass half full or half empty? The unbiased, this is about what degree are you being pragmatic versus emotional. So a 1, 2, or 3, an underusing zone would look like emotions and feelings are a big driver behind your decisions. The overusing zone would look like the pragmatism dominates your decision making. Self-esteem, my internal sense of self-worth, whereby self-confidence, which we measure in the emotional intelligence piece, is very much the confidence to act. Self-esteem is how I feel about me. And then perseverance, adaptability, and assertiveness are pretty self-explanatory. Once again, having established that common language, here are your results, day-to-day across the top, and right beneath them are your under pressure results. What do you see? What do you need? What's serving you? The other aspect about resilience is that often you'll hear it being referred to as a binary concept. Someone either has it or they do not have it. That's not our approach with Flow Profiler. Our research actually tells us that it is a combination of these behaviors that go to demonstrate resilience in the workplace. So always very interesting conversations behind this particular report as well. Once again, we go on ahead and we are reporting dimension by dimension, day-to-day first, with the under pressure seated right behind. At the end of the report, we have got some action planning space, a couple of questions that an individual who may be using this as a self-directed learning tool could ask for their reflections, and then we're very much at the end of the report. So that is how I approach my feedback sessions, and certainly what we would recommend in terms of industry best practice. The key points to take away are very much covering off the session purpose, including test approach, and perhaps even how the information is going to be used. And then using the report to demonstrate what is being measured using the model page, how it's being measured using the STEM score page, and then answering any questions that the person may have about the results, the measurement, the scale, or even the definitions. From here, you are ready to move to your next steps, which is very much how you're going to proceed. That will be determined by the organisation, but it may be that development conversation or that training program or that benchmarking exercise. Now, just so you have this information, this is the very first level in our interpreter training series, which is about building this capability, confidence, competency, autonomy within your organisation so that you can be self-sufficient in your use of the Flow Profiler reports. We've also gone ahead and developed our level 2, which is all about the applications of Flow Profiler, because not all organisations use Flow Profiler the same way. Some focus on the one-on-one development conversations or equipping their management team or leadership team with the skills and abilities to use the Flow Profiler reports in a development conversation. Our level 2 module B is very much around our team chart interpretation and some hints and tips that you might choose to use when facilitating your team sessions. And then finally, for those organizations using flowprofiler in recruitment, this module is great. It really very much steps you through our recruitment strategy for flowprofiler and behavioral-based recruitment campaigns. And then for those people who have become our practitioners, our super fans, we have our level 3, our super interpreter, where we look at a whole variety of different ways, different correlations, different ways you can interpret data, and so on and so forth for our super interpreters. Hey, thank you so much for your time. I hope that was useful, and please feel free to reach out to us directly at hello@flowprofiler.com or in the comments below if we can help in any way. We look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.